Bro woke up as a mushroom. Not a powerful dragon, not a chosen hero, not even a slime. A mushroom. The weakest, most ignored, most pathetic creature in the entire dungeon. And somehow, this absolute nobody is about to become the most terrifying monster killer anyone has ever seen. Okay, so picture this. There is an entire underground world built like a video game, complete with dungeons, floors, boss rooms, treasure chests, and players who log in just to grind monsters for fun. The monsters living inside? They are NPCs, non-playable characters. Completely programmed, completely brainless, completely expendable. They exist for one reason only: to get slaughtered by players who want to level up faster. Nobody cares about the NPCs. Nobody thinks about what happens inside their heads. Nobody asks if maybe, just maybe, one of them woke up today a little different, a little more aware, a little more angry. Because here is the thing about this particular dungeon. One of those NPCs is not actually an NPC at all. He is a real person. A human soul stuffed into the body of a level 1 mushroom monster with no stats, no weapon, no allies, and absolutely no idea what is happening. His name is Yang Jun, also known as Xing Bao, and he died in possibly the most embarrassing way a person can die. But none of that matters right now because he just opened his eyes, looked at his hands, and realized something has gone very, very wrong. This is the story of how the weakest thing in the dungeon became the one thing every player on every floor started to fear. So our boy did not get a cool awakening scene. There was no dramatic lightning strike, no glowing system window appearing in a golden beam of light, no wise old master placing a hand on his shoulder and telling him he was the chosen one. No, what he got instead was confusion, darkness, something heavy sitting on top of his head, and the growing realization that his hands looked absolutely nothing like human hands anymore. He pushed his hair aside, looked down, saw stubby little fingers attached to a round, soft body, and immediately looked for the nearest reflective surface because there was no way, there was absolutely no way, this was real. He found a puddle. He looked, and staring back at him from that puddle was a small round mushroom man with a cap on his head that he could not remove no matter how hard he pulled. Bro stood there for a solid moment, just completely frozen, which honestly is the correct reaction when you discover you have been turned into a fungus. Then he tried to remember what happened before he ended up here. He thought back to his last memory. He was watching a pretty woman on his screen. Things escalated the way they sometimes do when you are home alone with too much free time. And then his heart just gave out. That was it. That was the cause of death. He basically died doing what he loved and got reincarnated as a dungeon mushroom for it. Look, people get hit by trucks in these stories all the time. So honestly, this is at least original. At least he went out on his own terms. Our boy processed this information for about 3 seconds and then immediately started complaining about his face, specifically the fact that he no longer had the handsome one he was born with, and demanded the universe give it back. The universe did not respond. Then a voice called out to him. Someone waddled over, another mushroom, small and wilted, looking like it had not had a good day in its entire existence, and greeted him like an old friend. Xing Bao heard the voice, and his brain immediately jumped to hope. A woman's voice, maybe? A pretty girl in the dungeon? He got excited for exactly 2 seconds before he looked properly and saw the reality. A sad, droopy little mushroom staring up at him with completely blank eyes. Poor guy truly cannot catch a break, not even for 1 minute after waking up dead. He asked the mushroom what they were supposed to do around here, what their whole deal was, and the mushroom cheerfully explained that mushroom men basically had 2 modes: intruders, kill them, and a scream. That was the full personality. That was the complete range of behavior available to them. They were NPCs, programmed monsters. The dungeon's content, not its players. And right on cue, before Xing Bao could even sit with how depressing that information was, footsteps echoed through the corridor. 2 figures walked in like they owned the place, because from their perspective they absolutely did. A level 1 orc archer named Labu, and a level 1 orc warrior named Kabu. 2 players who had logged into the dungeon to do a quick speed run before dinner probably. Kabu was already telling Labu to relax, that the monsters here were the lowest level possible, that they were completely dumb, that their movements were fixed patterns, and that there was nothing to worry about. He proved his point immediately by casually slicing through 3 mushroom men who charged straight at him in a straight line without any attempt to dodge or think. Labu agreed they could speedrun it again. They were having a great time. Xingbao watched all of this from a distance and felt something between horror and confusion. He asked his mushroom friend why nobody was trying to run away, why all the mushroom men were just charging straight into death without hesitation, and his friend explained it simply. They were NPCs. They had no choice. Their programming said charge, so they charged. They did not have the ability to think differently, to feel fear, to make a decision based on survival. The players were free agents who could do anything they wanted. The monsters were scripts running on a loop until they got deleted. It was, in Xingbao's own words, a completely insane setup. But he did not have time to sit with that realization because an arrow suddenly came flying toward both of them and nearly took his cap off. He grabbed his mushroom friend and ran. And this is where everything changed, because the moment he grabbed that mushroom and moved in a direction that no mushroom man was ever supposed to move, the dungeon system noticed. A data anomaly warning fired off in the air above him, blinking red, repeating itself over and over. Something had broken. Something had gone wrong with the programming. Because mushroom men did not run. Mushroom men did not grab their friends. Mushroom men did not look at a situation and choose survival over their coded instructions. Xingbao did all three at once, and the system absolutely did not know what to do about it. Labu on the cliff above saw them running and decided she was not letting this bug escape. She drew her bow and started firing. Xingbao was dodging, ducking, moving in ways that a level 1 mushroom man body had no business moving, and somewhere in the chaos he spotted a treasure chest sitting against the wall. His mushroom friend immediately told him not to bother. Those chests were designed exclusively for players. NPCs could not open them. It was physically impossible, hard-coded into the dungeon rules. Xingbao tried to open it anyway. Another anomaly warning exploded, and then the chest opened. He pulled out a knife and held it in his small mushroom hand and stared at it like he had just pulled a legendary weapon out of thin air, because in this dungeon, for a monster, he basically had. But the moment he had the knife in his hand, Labu fired again, and this time the arrow was not aimed at Xingbao. It was aimed at the small wilted mushroom standing right beside him. And what happened next genuinely should not have been possible. The mushroom, the sad little NPC who was not supposed to feel anything, who was not supposed to make choices, who was not supposed to do anything except follow its program, stepped forward. It moved in front of Xingbao. It blocked the arrow with its own body. The system screamed another anomaly warning, and the arrow went straight through its chest. It refused to let anyone hurt him, and it paid for that choice with everything it had. Xingbao froze completely as the blood spread across his friend's body, and then a second arrow was already in the air, and something inside him did not just snap, it shattered. He did not think. He did not plan. He did not calculate the odds or check his stats or wonder whether a level 1 mushroom man with a kitchen knife had any realistic chance against a trained orc archer. He just moved. His hand came up, and he swatted the incoming arrow right out of the air like it was a fly buzzing past his face. And for a full second nobody in that dungeon made a single sound. Not Xingbao. Not the remaining mushroom men hiding in the shadows. And definitely not Labu, who was standing on the cliff above with her bow still raised, staring down at something that her entire understanding of this dungeon told her was completely impossible. She had been running these low-level floors for a while. She knew exactly what mushroom men were capable of. She knew their stats, their patterns, their limits. And a level 1 mushroom man catching an arrow barehanded was so far outside those limits that her brain genuinely struggled to process what her eyes had just shown her. She did not move for a moment. She just stared, and our boy stared right back up at her with a knife in one hand and absolutely nothing to lose. Meanwhile, on the other side of this situation, Kaboo had already logged out of the dungeon to go file a bug report with the admin necromancers, because yes, this dungeon has an entire administrative system run by necromancers who maintain the dungeon on behalf of the Great Lich who built it in the first place. Here is some context that makes this whole world even more wild. After defeating the human coalition in a massive war, the Great Lich looked around at all these powerful heroes with nothing to do and basically thought, I should build them a video game so they stop causing problems. So he designed an entire dungeon system, stocked it with monster NPCs on every floor, gave the heroes player privileges, and let them grind and farm and level up for entertainment. The necromancers act as admins who patch bugs and fix broken content. Kabu's casual approach to filing a complaint about Xing Bao is genuinely one of the funniest things in this whole story, because he just treated our boy like a software glitch that needed a ticket submitted. He even told Labu not to die before he logged out, which in hindsight was extremely bad advice. Labu decided she was not waiting for any admin. She was going to fix this bug herself, right now, personally. She unleashed a rapid volley of arrows, shooting faster, shooting harder, completely committing to ending this anomaly before it could spread. And Xing Bao, with his mushroom man body that apparently had much better base reflexes than anyone, including himself, expected, started parrying them. Not perfectly, not gracefully, but enough. He was blocking arrows with his knife, weaving between shots, using the terrain instinctively. His brain was running on pure survival instinct at this point. Not strategy, not training, just the raw refusal to die a second time. He noticed the empty treasure chest nearby and made a decision in about half a second. He grabbed the lid and held it up like a shield. Labu kept firing. Every arrow hit the lid. She could not get through. And she could not understand how a monster that was supposed to have the intelligence of a loading screen was outplaying her in real time. She got frustrated. Frustrated players make mistakes. She leaned too far forward trying to line up a better shot, committed to a trajectory for just a moment too long, and that was all Xing Bao needed. He exploded off the ground, crossed the distance between them faster than she could adjust her aim, and came down on her like a falling meteor with his knife extended. The cut was clean. It was brutal. It was the kind of thing that ends a fight permanently. Labu collapsed, and the system registered the kill with a notification that appeared in the air above Xing Bao, like a golden banner announcing his arrival to every floor in the dungeon. First blood. Our boy had just killed his first player. And then the system absolutely lost its mind in the best possible way. 3 racial talents unlocked simultaneously, which is not something that happens to mushroom men. Ever. The first was mycelial network, a web of invisible fungal threads he could extend through the environment to link with allies, share vision and information, and coordinate attacks across distances. The second was plant mushroom, the ability to step onto a corpse or nutrient-rich area, absorb everything inside it including stats, class abilities, and racial talents, and grow something new from what remained. The third was shroom form switch, the ability to reshape his physical appearance based on what he had absorbed, essentially letting him wear different bodies depending on what he needed. Our boy stood there reading these system notifications with the same energy as someone who expected to get a $10 gift card and instead got handed the keys to a car. He did not ask for any of this. He did not know any of this was possible. But after waking up as a mushroom today, he had decided that surprising things were just going to keep happening and he was going to roll with all of them. He activated plant mushroom immediately and stepped onto Labu's corpse. The absorption began, nutrients and data flowing up through his feet, the system processing everything she had been in life and converting it into something he could use. And then the absorption finished, and something started growing out of the ground. Slowly at first, a sprout, a stem, a shape forming in the glow of the dungeon light. Then faster, the shape filling out, taking definition, becoming something recognizable. A leg, a torso, a face. And when the light faded, standing in front of Xing Bao was a woman. A genuinely beautiful woman, fully formed, staring at him with calm eyes and waiting for a command. Xing Bao got an immediate nosebleed. He could not help it. He was a simple man, even in mushroom form apparently. She was level 2, archer class, agility as her primary stat, and she came preloaded with abilities stolen directly from Labu. Parasitic spore arrows that embedded themselves in enemies and drained nutrients from the inside, without the target even noticing, plus the Orc Berserk racial talent boosting her damage significantly for short bursts. She looked at Xing Bao and said one word. Chief. He named her Xiong and tried very hard to act like he was not still having a nosebleed about the whole situation. The team was now 2 members strong, which was 2 members more than any Mushroom Man tribe in this dungeon had ever managed, and Xing Bao was already thinking about next steps when Kabu came jogging back into the dungeon with the energy of someone expecting an easy loot run. He found Labu's bones on the floor. He stood there for a moment doing the math. Then he decided this was actually great news, because rare elite monsters always dropped exceptional loot, and clearly something powerful had taken out Labu, which meant blue gear was possibly on the table. He activated Orc Charge and came in screaming, because Orc warriors have never once in recorded history considered that charging might be the wrong call. Xing Bao parried the strike, scratched him on the thigh, and watched Kabu's expression shift from confident to annoyed to genuinely angry in about 4 seconds flat. The orc admitted, through gritted teeth, that he was surprised the mushroom had actually managed to scratch him. He geared up for a second charge, and then Xing Bao turned around and ran. Not because he was scared, not because he had given up, but because he had already spotted the wooden bridge across the corridor, and his brain had done the calculation before his feet even started moving. He ran to the bridge, crossed it, and then stopped. Completely stopped. Just stood there in the middle of the path on the far side. Perfectly still, not attacking, not retreating, just waiting. Kabu chased him through, smashed the door to splinters, and then stopped too, because something felt wrong. The mushroom was just standing there. Not running, not fighting, just waiting with this energy that made the back of Kabu's neck prickle. He told himself it was fine. It was still just an NPC. It was still just a bug. There was no way a mushroom man was actually setting a trap. And then our boy slowly raised his hand, extended one finger, the middle one, and held it up directly at the full-armored orc warrior standing across from him. Kabu's brain went completely white with rage. He roared that he would chop this mushroom into paste, and stepped forward onto the wooden bridge, and the planks immediately started groaning under his weight, and then cracking, and then the entire structure gave way and dropped him straight into the water below. He was cursing before he even hit the surface. He came up spitting water, furious, calling Xing Bao every name he could think of, and then he noticed his weapon had slipped from his hand during the fall and was sitting at the bottom of the water somewhere. He was restricted by the current, slowed down, unarmed, and absolutely livid. Xing Bao threw a knife from the bank that lodged into Kabu's shoulder, and Kabu laughed it off because even slowed and stuck in water, a weakling mushroom's attack was not going to finish him. He was still completely confident. He was still completely wrong. Because from somewhere in the shadows above the waterline, Siong had been watching and waiting, and she drew back her bow and fired once, and the arrow hit the side of Kabu's neck perfectly, and he turned to see where it came from, and she fired again, and the second arrow hit him in the head, and the orc warrior went under and did not come back up. Another player eliminated. The system window appeared again. More experience, more levels, more power stacking up in the body of something that was supposed to spend its entire existence getting cut down in a tutorial zone. So our boy was now standing in a dungeon corridor with 2 player kills under his belt, a beautiful archer subordinate at his side, and a body that used to be a round little mushroom man and was now slowly becoming something far more dangerous. He activated plant mushroom on Kabu's waterlogged corpse and let the absorption run, pulling everything the orc warrior had been in life into himself. The strength, the combat instincts, the racial abilities, the raw physical power that made orc warriors the terrifying frontline fighters they were known to be across every floor of this dungeon. The process finished, and the system did something our boy genuinely did not see coming. Shroom form switch activated on its own, smoke filled the corridor, and when it cleared, Xing Bao was standing there in a completely reshaped body. Human in appearance, blue rank warrior class, strength as his primary stat, with the orc berserk talent already loaded and ready to fire. He looked down at himself, looked at his hands, looked at his build, and felt something swinging near his legs. He panicked. He looked down properly. It was the axe handle hanging from his belt. He had not put on pants yet. He let out a breath he had been holding for entirely too long and told himself to calm down, which was very reasonable advice that he would ignore constantly for the rest of this story. He was now Yongjun in full, Mushroom Man Chief, Rank Chief, Class Warrior Blue, and honestly looking more like a player than half the players in this dungeon. The abilities were stacking beautifully. Mycelial Network let him extend invisible fungal threads through the environment and maintain a shared vision link with anyone connected to it. Plant Mushroom let him absorb corpses and grow new subordinates from what remained, each one inheriting skills and stats from whatever he absorbed. Shroom Form Switch let him and his subordinates reshape their physical appearance after a full absorption. And now on top of all of that, The Orc Berserk talent was sitting in his kit ready to boost his damage by 30% whenever he needed an extra punch. He had walked into this dungeon as the most useless possible creature, and inside the span of a single floor he had built a system, recruited a subordinate, killed 2 players, and reshaped his entire body. Yep, this guy was already insane, and we were still on floor 1. He and Seong moved forward together through the dungeon corridor and eventually hit a snail nest, which sounds ridiculous, but was actually a genuine problem because the snails living in this section were not the slow garden variety. They were dungeon predators with electrical attacks, fast reflexes, and a serious attitude about their territory. Xing Bao and Seong cleared through the outer nest without too much trouble, using the combination of her parasitic spore arrows and his melee combat to work through the population efficiently. But at the end of the corridor sat the boss room, and when our boy pushed the door open and stepped inside, the room was completely empty. Nothing on the floor, nothing on the walls, just silence and the faint smell of something damp and electrical in the air. He stood still and listened. He felt something, a presence, a weight in the air above him. And then a monster dropped onto his back from the ceiling with enough force to slam him into the ground, and the boss fight began before he had even finished reading the room. He rolled free, got to his feet, and got his first proper look at what he was dealing with. A snail shell the size of a boulder was spinning toward him at high speed, edge first, rotating like a thrown disc. He got his sword up in time to block it, but the impact sent vibrations all the way up his arms, and the force was enough to launch him backward through the air. He used his mycelium to latch onto the wall and arrest his flight, pulled himself back into position, and started paying attention because this boss was not playing around. He tried electrifying the area using the volt abilities he had picked up from earlier, channeling current through the puddles on the floor and aiming it at the shell, but the Snail King was ready for that. It absorbed the current without flinching, emerged from its shell standing upright on 2 legs, bipedal, armored, carrying an actual sword, wearing the shell on its back like a second skin it could deploy as a weapon whenever it wanted, and looked at Xing Bao with the kind of calm superiority that only comes from absolute confidence in your home territory. The level 5 Snail King had arrived. Our boy looked at it, took in the sword, the armor, the height, the second phase that nobody warned him about, and said he found it interesting. Not scared, not overwhelmed, interested, which was either the most confident thing anyone had ever said in that boss room or the most delusional. And at this point with this particular guy the line between those two things was basically invisible. The Snail King wasted no time explaining that this was its home ground, that it controlled the battlefield completely, and that Xing Bao had approximately 0 chance of winning here. It was not wrong about the home ground part. The entire floor was coated in a slippery liquid that the Snail King could control at will, adjusting its viscosity and electrical resistance to neutralize any strategy our boy tried to use. The moment Xing Bao tried to plant his feet and fight properly, he slid. The moment he tried to stick his mycelium to the ceiling for positioning, it slipped right off the coated surface. He lost his sword when the Snail King hit his wrist at exactly the right angle. He was fighting on a surface designed specifically to make everything he was good at useless, and the boss knew it and was enjoying every second of it. But here is the thing about Xing Bao that the Snail King had not figured out yet. He did not win fights by being stronger than his opponent. He won fights by making his opponent fight in conditions they did not choose. He had done it with Kabu on the bridge. He had done it with Labu on the cliff. Every single victory so far had come not from raw power, but from changing the shape of the battlefield until the enemy was fighting on his terms instead of their own. And he had been watching the Snail King move since the moment that second phase started. He watched how it controlled the liquid. He watched which directions it prioritized. He watched where it put its feet and how it repositioned after each attack. And while the Snail King was busy monologuing about home ground advantage and the inferiority of mushroom men in the natural order of the dungeon ecosystem, our boy was doing something underneath the surface of all that slippery water that the boss had not noticed at all. He was spreading his mycelium. Slowly, carefully, thread by thread, extending the fungal network across the entire floor of that boss room, pushing it through the liquid, weaving it into every crack and gap in the stone beneath, connecting it all into one single unified web that covered the room from wall to wall without disturbing a single drop of water on the surface above. The Snail King kept talking. It kept attacking. It kept knocking him around and mocking him and explaining at length why creatures like Xing Bao existed at the bottom of the food chain and would always stay there. And our boy kept absorbing the hits, kept getting back up, kept moving just enough to stay alive, and kept extending the network until every inch of that floor was connected to him. Then he looked at the Snail King standing in the center of all of it, completely surrounded, completely unaware, and he said very calmly that he had not been aiming for the snail at all during this entire fight. He was never trying to hit it directly. He was aiming for something else entirely. The Snail King looked down. It saw the mycelium. It saw how far the network had spread. It felt the first flicker of something it had not felt in this boss room in a very long time, uncertainty. It told itself it was fine, that it could still increase the water's electrical resistance, that it could still neutralize whatever attack was coming, that it had too much control over this environment to lose. Then Xing Bao activated Ignite, and the entire mycelial network across the whole floor lit up simultaneously, and the fire did not travel through the water the way electricity would. Fire spread across the surface, leaping from thread to thread, chain reaction igniting chain reaction, and the Snail King was standing in the middle of all of it with nowhere to go and no resistance stat that helped against flames. The explosion was enormous. The heat was instant. When the smoke finally cleared and the fire died down, there was nothing left of the level 5 Snail King except a charred outline and ash settling slowly onto the wet floor, and Xing Bao standing at the edge of it all breathing hard, but upright and undefeated. The system notifications came in so fast after that boss fight that our boy had to stand still for a moment just to read them all, because the dungeon was apparently very excited about what had just happened in that boss room, and wanted to make sure he knew exactly how much had changed. First notification, he and all his subordinates had leveled up to level 5 simultaneously, which pushed every single stat across the board and felt like someone had grabbed his whole body and turned the dial up 3 notches in every direction. Second notification, he had unlocked mycelium wrappers, the ability to compress equipment and store it directly inside his body so he could pull out weapons and tools on the go without fumbling through bags or pouches. Third notification, his probe shroom ability had upgraded to function as a network download terminal, meaning equipment that Firehammer forged anywhere in the dungeon could be transmitted directly through the mycelial network and downloaded by any connected subordinate in the field without physically exchanging anything. Fourth notification, he could now cultivate a brand new unit type called Boomshroom Guards, heavy combat units capable of both melee and ranged fighting that could attach themselves or their weapons to enemies using mycelium threads and then detonate on command, with damage scaling based on the elemental attribute used during cultivation and explosion strength adjusting based on the unit stats. Fifth notification, Xiong had comprehended her core skill Spore Canister, a charged ability that built up through normal attacks and released as a single devastating arrow that scattered spore bombs across a wide area on impact, causing chain explosions that hit everything in the blast zone. Sixth notification, Firehammer had comprehended Reckless Smelting, a combat-triggered forging skill that let him rapidly purify materials by releasing built-up forge energy through his hammer, breaking down impurities in seconds, and turning garbage metal into usable resources on the spot. Our boy stood in the middle of all these notifications blinking at the screen like someone who had just opened their first gacha pull and got nothing but 5-star cards across the board. Yep, this guy was absolutely built different, and the dungeon was only now starting to realize what it had created. Speaking of Firehammer, let us back up a little bit and explain how this absolute unit joined the team, because his origin story is one of the more interesting ones in this whole operation. While Xiong had been handling the slime floors and our boy was clearing the snail sections in the boss room, Jun had taken a detour through an area called the Great Graveyard, which was exactly as grim as it sounded, a massive dumping ground at the very bottom of the dungeon where everything unwanted got thrown. Garbage, broken equipment, player discards, monster corpses, and all the waste that filtered down from every floor above through a massive garbage chute in the ceiling. Normal people would have held their nose and kept walking. Xing Bao walked in, took one breath of the absolutely horrific smell, and immediately started identifying resources. He could sense leftover nutrients in the old remains, potion residue soaked into the soil, tar deposits, scraps of materials that players had thrown away as worthless, and even a torn magic book half buried under a pile of unidentifiable organic matter. He absorbed everything available and planted a new shroom soldier from the nutrients. And what emerged was a mushroom with a flaming head, a level 2 pyro shroom with fire as its main stat, an explosive fire attack skill called Pyroblast, and a movement speed boost called Blazing Sprint. His growing army now had a ranged fire unit, and he had not even started on the interesting part of the graveyard yet. Because through his probe shroom network, which he had been extending quietly across the dungeon while fighting, he sensed something happening nearby. A confrontation between a group of troll players and a dwarf who was refusing to go with them. The trolls wanted the dwarf for his crafting skills. They had apparently been running a slave operation, forcing dwarf craftsmen to forge weapons and equipment for them, working them until they dropped from exhaustion, and then coming back into the dungeon to find more when the current ones died. The dwarf was the last of a group that had managed to break free, and he was not going back, and the trolls were not interested in negotiating. The fight was brief and brutal, and by the time June's probe shrooms fully locked onto the location, the dwarf craftsman was already dead. June arrived through the network too late to save him. But death in this dungeon, as he was learning very quickly, was not always the end of the story. He released spores through the mycelial network, targeted the craftsman's corpse, and activated plant mushroom from a distance. The glow spread. The absorption ran. And from the remains of the dwarf rose something remarkable, a level 4 pyro dwarf craftsman, stocky and flame-resistant, carrying a massive forging hammer that he could throw and recall like a boomerang, wrapped in fire mycelium chains that connected to the network for shared vision and combat coordination. His crafting skill was exceptional, enhanced further by his fire attribute, making his forging efficiency significantly higher than a normal smith. And when he regained consciousness and realized what had happened to him, he tried to protest, which June did not really have time for. So he named him Firehammer and moved on to the next problem. The next problem was the troll players who had just killed the dwarf, who were now wandering around the graveyard area looking for whatever had set off the anomaly readings on their end. There were 3 of them, led by a level 3 troll with enough confidence to make up for the complete absence of good tactical judgment. They spotted Firehammer moving through the corridor and immediately assumed they had found a rare elite monster with great loot potential, which was technically accurate in a way they did not fully understand yet. The troll leader threw his spear first. Firehammer caught it in the air, turned it around in his hands like he was inspecting a piece of scrap metal, found it lacking, and threw his own hammer back at them instead. The hammer hit the ground in front of the trolls with an explosion that sent 2 of them stumbling backward, and before they could recover it lifted off the ground on its own, guided by mycelium threads connecting it back to Firehammer, and came at them again from a completely unexpected angle. They were screaming about how a monster could have self-targeting equipment. One of them got his throwing arm caught by a mycelial entanglement that locked his hand in place, and then mycelial ignition triggered and his arm exploded in a cascade of fire, and he went down hard. Firehammer was already moving to the next target, jumping onto its back, slamming its face into the dungeon floor, spinning to catch the third one mid-swing with a punch that sent it crashing into the cave wall hard enough to crack the stone. He pulled his hammer back through the air, called down a section of ceiling supports with a precise strike, triggered cave-in conditions, and then activated Firehammer ignition and flying hammer fire rain simultaneously, coating the hammer in flames and sending it spinning through the falling debris and the scrambling trolls like a guided missile that also happened to be on fire. The system window confirmed all 3 troll players eliminated. Firehammer had barely broken a sweat. The dungeon had a new craftsman, and that craftsman was absolutely unhinged in the best possible way. With the team fully assembled, June, Siong, Firehammer, the Probe Shrooms, the Volt Shroom, the Pyro Shroom, and now 2 freshly cultivated Boomshroom guards, they established the Great Graveyard as their base of operations, and Firehammer got to work immediately. He had identified something extraordinary in the graveyard soil that nobody else would have even looked at twice. Blackrot stones, compressed masses of magic waste and humus that had been accumulating at the bottom of the dungeon for years. Normal alchemists and blacksmiths would have walked right past them. But Firehammer was not a normal blacksmith anymore. He activated mycelial extraction and pulled the trace magical residue out of the rot stones like squeezing juice from fruit, and what came out were magic silver stone fragments, magic iron fragments, magic copper and gold fragments. High-value crafting materials that players spent serious time farming on upper floors, sitting in the garbage dump at the bottom because nobody had ever thought to look for them there. He extracted several full sets before a massive worm monster called a scavenger blackbug came smashing through the ceiling looking for the source of the nutrient disturbance, and Siong engaged it, while Firehammer kept working through the interruption like a true professional who had seen worse things than giant cave worms on a Tuesday. The scavenger blackbug was a serious opponent, heavily armored, enormous, with a shell thick enough to shrug off most conventional attacks and a natural frenzy response to any creature competing for the same ecological niche. Siong worked through her spore arrow rotation, building rage with every strike, and when she downloaded the new magic silver arrows Firehammer had just forged through the mycelial network terminal. 6%, loading, 86%, and the blackbug was getting closer, and finally 100% just in the nick of time. She had the weapon she needed. She gathered full charge, aimed directly at the blackbug's open mouth, and fired a completely charged shattered edge roar arrow that embedded itself between the creature's teeth, and then mushrooms started growing inside its mouth, spreading fast, glowing, until the entire creature detonated from the inside in a spectacular explosion that left nothing behind except ash and a notification that Siong had gained significant experience. The Boomshroom guards handled the second blackbug that appeared immediately after, because of course there was a second one. One of them coated its weapon in fire and threw it for a direct hit. The other charged in and physically shoved the enormous monster backward with a single strike that sent it tumbling. And then together they finished it with a self-detonating sword thrown directly into its open mouth that blew the upper body apart completely. After everything that had happened, 2-player kills on floor 1. A boss fight that ended with an entire room on fire, a craftsman recruited from a graveyard, weapons forged from magic garbage, and 2 scavenger blackbugs reduced to ash by a team that did not exist 48 hours ago. Yongjun stood in the middle of his newly claimed base camp in the Great Graveyard and took stock of exactly where things stood. The system had just pushed the entire Mushroom Man tribe to level 7. Which came with a new set of notifications that our boy read through with the focused energy of someone planning a military campaign rather than a person who had technically died of embarrassing circumstances and woken up as a fungus. The new chief exclusive skill was called Lone Sovereign, and it was arguably the most broken thing the system had handed him yet. For every subordinate not physically present at his side, whether fallen or simply deployed elsewhere, all of his personal stats increased by 10%. Stacking up to a maximum of 100% total. Meaning if he went into a fight completely alone with all 6 subordinate slots filled, but nobody standing next to him, he would be operating at double his base stats across every single number on his sheet. The dungeon had accidentally designed a skill that rewarded the exact playstyle of someone who was building an army and sending them everywhere simultaneously, which described Yongjun's entire strategy from the moment he woke up in this place. He read that notification twice just to make sure he understood it correctly, confirmed that he did, and felt something settle in his chest that might have been satisfaction or might have been the dawning realization that he was going to be very difficult to stop. He also unlocked 2 new cultivatable unit types with this level threshold. The first was Archer Shroom, a ranged unit that fought with a short blade in close quarters and fired split arrows with different elemental attributes at range, with the additional ability to deploy a spore umbrella from its cap for short controlled glides that gave it exceptional repositioning in 3-dimensional environments. The special mechanic that made Archer Shroom particularly valuable was its synergy with Siong. When deployed beside her in the field, it triggered a troop inspiration effect that boosted all of her stats by 10%, meaning Siong with an Archer Shroom at her side was a meaningfully different combatant than Siong operating solo. The second new unit was Tunneling Shroom, a worker class that had absorbed the burrowing ability of the scavenger blackbugs they had just eliminated, giving it the capacity to drill through solid rock and reshape cave systems at will. Its synergy was with Firehammer. When working beside him, it triggered a captain inspiration effect that boosted work efficiency by 10%, meaning the combination of firehammer forging and tunneling shroom reshaping the terrain around the forge was going to make their base camp something genuinely impressive over time. Our boy looked at all of this, looked at his team, looked at the graveyard they had claimed, and then looked upward toward the floors above and started planning the route. He gathered everyone together and laid out the situation clearly. The great graveyard sat at the very bottom of the entire dungeon structure. The only way out was up, and the only way up was through. Every floor had a one-way barrier that allowed movement downward but blocked upward travel except through the designated passage at the end of each floor, which meant they would have to fight their way through every single floor from bottom to top. There was no skipping. There was no shortcut. There was no admin they could submit a ticket to and ask for a fast travel option. It was floor by floor, enemy by enemy, player by player, all the way to the surface. Some people would find that daunting. Young Jun found it convenient, because every floor they cleared was a new hunting ground, a new source of corpses to absorb and grow from, a new population of monsters and players who would eventually become either nutrients or subordinates or both. He told Seong and Firehammer the plan. Seong was immediately ready. Firehammer took a second longer, still occasionally processing the fact that he had recently been dead and was now a fire-wielding mushroom dwarf working for a human who was also technically a mushroom, but he got there eventually. The squad movement configuration was decided. Firehammer would stay at the base camp to guard the black rot stone extraction operation and continue forging with the tunneling shroom, while Jun and Seong pushed forward through the upper floors. Through the shared mycelial network, Firehammer would gain experience from every enemy they eliminated regardless of distance, meaning he would keep leveling and improving his forge capabilities while they fought. The probe shrooms would serve as eyes throughout the network, tracking enemy positions, relaying information, and acting as download terminals for any new equipment Firehammer completed during the push. It was a genuinely efficient system for a group that had existed for less than 2 days. They moved out together into the corridor leading upward, and things immediately went sideways in a way that was new but also somehow completely on brand for everything that had happened so far. A section of the floor triggered without warning. A hidden magic sigil array embedded in the stone activated the moment Jun stepped on it, and a reinforced wall dropped from the ceiling in the space between him and Seong, separating them completely in under a second. He slammed a hand against it and felt the thickness, solid stone reinforced with a magic array that had been sitting dormant in the floor waiting for exactly this kind of anomaly to trigger it. He assessed it quickly, decided one punch should handle it, wrapped flame mycelium around his fist to add a fire attribute explosive strike, pulled back, and hit the wall with everything he had. The wall did not break. He flew backward instead. The magic array had absorbed the impact and redirected the force back at him, and he hit the opposite corridor wall hard enough to see stars for a moment. He picked himself up, studied the magic circle that had appeared at the point of impact, and revised his assessment. This was not a wall he could brute force through. The array was specifically designed to counter direct strikes. He and Seong were going to have to take separate paths forward. He called out through the mycelial network and told her the situation. She confirmed she understood and reported that her side of the wall was completely clear of enemies, which was strange but not unwelcome. He told her to keep moving, to absorb whatever nutrients she found, and to stay connected to the network at all times. She confirmed. Then he turned to face what was in front of him, and what was in front of him was the entrance to a section called the Slimy Corridor, a narrow, dark passage with moisture beading on every wall and the unmistakable sensation of being watched from somewhere he could not see. His probe shrooms had mapped part of this area already, and he knew what was inside. A snail nest, not the outer colony they had cleared earlier. A deeper nest, older and more established, populated by snails that had already heard through whatever communication system snails used that something had killed their brother in the Great Graveyard. They were waiting for him specifically. He stepped into the entrance anyway, because at this point our boy had fought a boss snail in a water-coated room while unable to stand properly, and won by setting the floor on fire, so a nest full of angry snails did not particularly change the math for him. He moved through the corridor carefully, extending his probe shrooms ahead to map the positions, reading the network data as it came in. Dozens of them, spread across the passage, some in shell form and some already in shellless mode, all of them orienting toward the entrance the moment he stepped inside. One of them spotted him and announced to the rest that this was the one who had killed their brother in the graveyard, and that everyone should attack immediately. They came at him with electrical bursts from multiple angles simultaneously, filling the corridor with arcing current that would have cooked anything with normal conductivity. Xingbao planted his volt shroom into the ground at his feet, and the electrical attacks hit the earth and dispersed through the mycelial network instead of through him, absorbed and redirected and wasted on stone instead of finding their target. The snails thought they had hit him. They thought they had finally gotten their revenge. And then one of them was cut clean in half from behind, and then another, because our boy had used the smoke from the electrical discharges as cover to move through them at speed, and the snails switched to shellless mode to keep up, declaring they would show him the true terror of the shellless tribe, and that he was slow and could not hit them at his current speed. He was not trying to hit them with direct strikes. He was doing the same thing he had done in the boss room, spreading mycelium across the floor while they talked, threading it through every crack and gap, connecting it all while they focused on their own movement speed and their own taunts. When the whole floor was covered, he activated mycelial detonation and triggered a chain of explosions that ran from wall to wall through the entire length of the corridor, and the experience notifications started coming in so fast they were practically stacking on top of each other. Every snail in the nest was eliminated in under 30 seconds. He stepped over the remains, pushed through to the boss room at the end, stepped inside, felt that familiar prickling sensation of something waiting in the dark above him, and looked up. The level 5 Snail King dropped from the ceiling. Except this was a different one, a new floor boss, armored and bipedal and carrying a sword just like the last one. And it told him that no mushroom man had ever made it this far, and that this was where his story ended, and that the Snail Kings had been running these floors since before the dungeon was a decade old and nothing had ever changed that. Yang Jun looked at it with the same calm interest he had given the last one. Then he looked at the floor beneath the Snail King's feet. Then he looked back up and smiled, because the mycelium was already there. He had extended it while walking through the corridor. It covered the entire boss room before he even stepped inside. He had learned from the first boss fight that the setup phase was the most important part, that the actual combat was just distraction, that everything he needed to win had to be in place before the enemy even knew a fight had started. The Snail King saw none of it coming. The ground ignited all at once. The fire spread in every direction simultaneously, and the Snail King looked down at the flames climbing toward it and said something that was either a battle cry or a curse, and then the explosion hit. And when the smoke cleared, our boy was standing in the center of another cleared boss room, with another notification window opening in front of him and another floor ahead waiting to be taken. Somewhere on the other side of the dungeon, Xiong was gaining experience through the network, meaning she was fighting her own battles in parallel and winning them, because she was built from the same system that had turned a dead mushroom man into the most dangerous thing on any floor he had walked through so far. And somewhere above them both, on floors they had not reached yet, players were logging in for what they thought was going to be a normal grind session, completely unaware that something was moving upward through the dungeon below them that was not a bug, not a glitch, not a rare elite with good loot. It was a chief, with an army, with a plan, and with absolutely nothing to lose. The dungeon had been running for years without anything changing. Every floor had its place. Every monster had its role. Every player had their privileges. And then one guy died watching a pretty woman on his screen and woke up as a mushroom and decided that none of those rules applied to him anymore. The floors above were waiting. The players above had no idea. And Yang Jun, Mushroom Man Chief, was just getting started. And that is where we are leaving things today, and honestly what a ride it has been from start to finish. A guy reincarnates as the weakest possible dungeon monster, breaks every rule the system has, builds an army out of absorbed corpses, clears 2 floors worth of bosses and players, and is already moving toward whatever nightmare is waiting on the floors above. And we are only at the beginning of this story. If you made it all the way here, you already know this series goes places that most manhwa would not even think about. And if you want to see where it goes next, smashing that subscribe button right now is genuinely the move, because we are covering every major development as it drops. Drop a comment below telling me which team member you think is the most dangerous, Xiong, Firehammer, or our boy himself, because that debate is worth having. Like the video if you enjoyed the recap, and we will see you in the next one.